An undercover CEO walks into his own restaurant to place an order and freezes when he hears two boys speaking behind him. Michael Luciano, the owner, had always adored his restaurant, Luciano's Bistro. It was the pride of his career, a place where each dish was a masterpiece and every meal felt like an unforgettable event. But lately, something felt off. The reviews online were glowing, the sales were stable, and the staff appeared happy. Yet Michael couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. He had lost touch with the very essence of his business. So, in his usual style when disconnected, he decided to go undercover. This time, not as a waiter or a cook, but as an ordinary customer. He dressed simply, hoodie, jeans, and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes, and made his way into his own restaurant on a rainy Tuesday evening. The staff hardly paid him any attention, just another customer amidst the dinner rush. He slipped into a booth near the back, his eyes scanning the bustling room. The restaurant was alive and full of energy. Servers zipped between tables, delivering plates of pasta and trays of drinks, while couples leaned in close, whispering sweet nothings across tables. Families laughed together, sharing dessert. Michael smiled to himself. Luciano's Bistro was thriving, no doubt about it. A cheerful waitress approached his table, her smile bright but slightly rehearsed. "Good evening. Can I start you off with something to drink?" "Water's fine," Michael replied casually, keeping his voice neutral, wanting to avoid recognition. "I'll need a few minutes to look over the menu." The waitress nodded and walked away. Michael opened the menu in front of him, though he knew it by heart. But his attention wasn't on the food, it was on the chatter surrounding him. This was his chance to hear raw, unfiltered opinions. He wanted to see his restaurant through the eyes of those who mattered the most, his customers. Just as he started to relax, he heard voices from the booth behind him. Two boys, speaking in hushed tones, caught his attention. "Do you think we'll even see him?" one whispered, his voice high and anxious, as if sneaking around was new to him. "I don't know," the second boy replied, his tone sharper. "But Mom said this is the place. She said he comes here all the time." Michael's ears perked up.
Who were they talking about?
He kept his head down, pretending to study the menu, but he was listening intently. "What if we get caught?" the first boy asked nervously. "We're not even supposed to be here." "We won't get caught," the second boy snapped, a bit of irritation in his voice. "We just need to figure out who he is." Michael frowned. Who are they looking for? His first instinct was to dismiss it as just curious kids, maybe looking for a local celebrity. But the urgency in their voices made him uneasy. "She said it's his fault everything went wrong," the second boy continued, a hint of bitterness creeping into his voice. "She said if it weren't for him, we wouldn't be living like this." Michael stiffened, his heart racing. His fault? The words hit too close to home. He forced himself to remain still, but his hands clenched around the menu. This was too personal, too pointed.
Who were they talking about?
The waitress returned, setting his water down with a smile. "Ready to order?" she asked brightly. Michael hesitated, glancing at the menu, though he wasn't really reading it. "I'll just have the house special," he replied, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. "Great choice," she said, jotting it down before disappearing again. As soon as she left, Michael leaned slightly to the side, trying to catch more of the boys' conversation without drawing attention to himself. "Mom said he ruined her life," the second boy muttered. "That he took everything from her. Do you think he'll even care?" the first boy whispered, his voice almost trembling. "I don't know," the second boy replied, his voice hardening. "But I want to see him. I want to see the guy who made us lose everything." Michael's stomach twisted in knots. Lose everything? The words hit him like a punch to the gut. They weren't talking about just anyone, they were talking about someone they blamed for their mother's suffering. And the bitterness in their voices, it sent an icy chill down his spine. Could they possibly be talking about him? It didn't make sense. Michael had always prided himself on running his business with integrity. Sure, he had made tough calls over the years, firing underperforming staff, negotiating hard with suppliers, but nothing that would justify this level of hatred, would it? The voices of the boys grew quieter, and Michael strained to hear more, his curiosity piqued. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was at the center of something much bigger than a simple misunderstanding. Michael knew he couldn't stay silent any longer. He had to understand what the boys were talking about. But confronting them directly felt risky. If they truly were talking about him, revealing his identity could escalate things in a way he wasn't prepared for. But staying quiet meant he might never get the answers he needed. Taking a deep breath, he glanced over at the booth behind him. The boys couldn't have been older than 13 or 14. One had a mess of curly hair peeking out from under a hoodie, while the other wore a baseball cap pulled low over his face. They looked nervous, constantly scanning the room, as if they expected to be thrown out at any moment. Michael's mind raced with options. Should he call the waitress over and ask her about the boys? Should he follow them when they left? Or perhaps, should he simply turn around and ask them directly who they were looking for? Before he could decide, the boy in the hoodie leaned closer to his companion. "We just need to wait a little longer," he whispered. "If he's here, we'll know." Amends said he wouldn't hide. The words hit Michael like a cold shock. Wouldn't hide. It felt like a direct challenge, an accusation aimed straight at him. He suddenly felt exposed, like they could see right through his disguise. What had he done to their mother? And why did they seem so certain that he was the man they were looking for? Michael didn't have the answers yet, but one thing was undeniable. His quiet undercover visit had just become far more complicated than he could have imagined. He couldn't walk away now, not without understanding more. Michael's pulse raced as he realized his undercover visit had morphed into something much more personal than he ever intended. He needed answers. Every word the boys spoke stabbed at him, each one sharper than the last. Amends said he ruined her life, took everything from her. Who was their mother? What connection did she have to him? Unable to sit and wonder any longer, Michael subtly adjusted his cap, stood up, and walked toward the counter near the kitchen. From there, he could keep an eye on the boys without being too obvious. As he waited for his food, he motioned for the waitress who had served him. "Hey," he said casually, trying to sound offhand. "Those two boys in the back, do they come here often?" The waitress glanced over her shoulder and shook her head. "No, I don't think I've seen them before."
Why?
"Are they causing troubles?" No, nothing like that," Michael quickly replied, trying to keep his voice neutral. "Just curious." The waitress shrugged and walked away, leaving Michael alone with his thoughts. The boys didn't look like troublemakers, but their hushed conversation suggested they were here for something or someone. The more Michael replayed their words in his mind, the more convinced he became. They were talking about him. Returning to his booth, Michael sat down and turned his attention back to the boys. They were still deep in conversation, their voices low but intense. "I just want to know why," the boy in the hoodie muttered. "Why he did it. And never tells us the full story." The boy in the cap hesitated. "What if it's not him? What if we got the wrong guys?" "It's him," the first boy insisted. "Em showed me his picture. It's definitely him." Michael's breath hitched. "They've seen my picture?" His chest tightened as flashes of memories, faces, and moments blurred together in his mind. But nothing stood out. Who could their mother be, and what had she told them about him? Unable to hold back any longer, Michael decided to take a direct approach. He stood, took a deep breath, and walked toward the boys' booth. As he approached, both of them tensed, their eyes widening as they met his gaze. "Hey," Michael said gently, sliding his hands into his pockets to appear non-threatening. "I couldn't help but notice you two seem a little uneasy. Is everything all right?" The boy in the hoodie straightened, his face hardening. "We're fine." Michael nodded, pretending not to notice the edge in the boy's voice. "That's good. I just thought, well, you mentioned someone earlier, someone who might be here. Are you looking for someone?" The boys exchanged a glance. The one in the cap fidgeted nervously. The boy in the hoodie shrugged his shoulders. "Why do you care?" he asked, his tone defensive. Michael hesitated, unsure of how to navigate this without revealing too much. He decided to proceed carefully. "I just thought maybe I could help. If you're looking for someone, I might know them." The boy in the hoodie narrowed his eyes, studying Michael's face. Then, as if something clicked, his expression shifted. "Wait a second," he said slowly. You look familiar. Michael's heart sank. He forced a small laugh, trying to cover his anxiety. A lot of people say that. I must have one of those faces. No, the boy insisted, his voice rising. You're him. You're Michael Luciano. The second boy gasped, his face draining of color. Are you serious? Is it really him? Michael felt as though the floor had dropped out from beneath him.
There was no denying it now.
He took a deep breath and quietly admitted, Yes, I'm Michael Luciano. But how do you know who I am? The boy in the hoodie glared at him, his green eyes burning with fury. Because of what you did. Because of what you did, the boy spat, his voice full of venom. Michael blinked, taken aback. Your mom?
He was stunned.
I'm sorry, but I don't even know who. Yes, you do, the boy interrupted, cutting him off. Angela Carter. Remember hers? The name struck Michael like a thunderclap. Angela Carter. His mind raced back, far back, to years ago, a talented, young woman who had worked as a sous chef for him. She had been full of passion, eager to make a name for herself in the culinary world. But then, one day, she had quit abruptly, leaving no explanation. Michael hadn't thought about her in years. Angela, he said slowly, the name heavy on his tongue. She worked here, didn't she? The boy's jaw clenched. She didn't just work here, he said, his voice bitter. She gave everything to this place. She helped you build it. And what did you do? You stole from her. You took her recipes and claimed them as your own. You made sure she couldn't get hired anywhere else. She told us everything. Michael's mind was reeling. His body went numb as the boy's words struck with a sharp intensity. That's not true, Michael said, his voice trembling. I never. Why would she think that? Because it's the truth. The boy snapped back, his anger building. You ruined her life. You ruined our lives. The second boy, quieter and more hesitant, spoke up. She said you were jealous of her, he muttered. That you couldn't handle someone else getting the spotlight. Michael felt like he had been punched in the stomach. His head spun as he tried to piece together what had happened all those years ago. Had he made mistakes? Had he been so focused on building his dream that he hadn't noticed someone else's world crumbling around him? I need to talk to your mom, Michael said finally, his voice firm, though still tinged with the weight of his confusion. If what she told you is true, I need to hear it from her.
Please.
Will you let me talk to hers? The boys exchanged a wary glance, uncertainty in their eyes. Finally, the one in the hoodie spoke up. She's not here right now, but if you really want to know the truth, you'll have to come see us. Michael nodded, his heart heavy with guilt and anticipation. Then I will. By the time Michael arrived at the modest apartment complex, the rain had turned into a steady drizzle. The building was old, with peeling paint and cracked sidewalks, a stark contrast to the upscale lifestyle he had grown accustomed to. Standing under the dim porch light, Michael felt a pang of guilt deep in his chest. If what the boys had said was true, if Angela Carter's life had spiraled because of him, then he owed her more than just an apology. He owed her an explanation. The door creaked open, and Jacob, the older boy, stood there, his expression guarded. You came, he said, his voice a mixture of surprise and distrust. Michael nodded. I need to understand what happened. Where's your mom? Jacob hesitated, stepping aside. She's in the living room. Michael stepped inside, his heart pounding. The apartment was small but tidy, with subtle signs of a life lived modestly but with care. Family photos lined the walls, and the faint smell of something floral lingered in the air. Michael's gaze landed on the woman sitting on the couch. Her face was partially obscured by the glow of the TV, but there was no mistaking her. Angela Carter. Her once vivid auburn hair was now streaked with gray, and there was a tiredness in her eyes that hadn't been there all those years ago. But despite the changes, she was still unmistakably Angela, the ambitious, determined woman who had once been a rising star in his kitchen. Angela, Michael said softly, his voice faltering. She looked up, her eyes locking with his. The silence between them was thick with years of unspoken history. Expression flickered between shock and resentment. Michael Luciano, she said, her voice cold. I can't say I expected to see you here. Michael took a step closer, his voice earnest, filled with regret. Angela, I didn't know it was you. The boys told me what you said about what happened. I need to know, did I really hurt you that badly? Angela's eyes narrowed, and she set the remote control aside. You don't remember, do you? She asked bitterly. Of course you don't. People like you never do. Angela, I'm not here to argue, Michael said, his voice trembling slightly. I honestly don't remember doing anything that could have destroyed your life. Please tell me what happened. Angela leaned back, crossing her arms over her chest. You want a short version? She snapped.
Fine.
You took credit for my work. All those dishes that made your restaurant famous. Most of them were mine. I trusted you, Michael. I thought you were mentoring me, helping me grow, but you were just using me. Michael's brow furrowed. Angela, that's not how I remember it. You were part of the team, an important part. But I never claimed your work as my own. Angela shot back, her voice rising in frustration. Then why did every article about Luciano's bistro mention your name, and only your name? Why did you ignore my contributions? And when I finally confronted you, what did you do? You blacklisted me. No one would hire me after I left. Michael's stomach churned. Blacklisted? Angela, I didn't. I would never. Yes, you did, she said, her voice trembling with anger. I tried to get jobs at every major restaurant in the city. And every time I was turned away, it was like someone had put a mark on my name. I had to leave the industry entirely. And now look at me. I'm here, barely getting by, working a job that doesn't even come close to what I was capable of. All because of you? Michael's heart sank. He hadn't been aware of any blacklisting, but that didn't mean it hadn't happened. He thought back to his early days running the restaurant, days filled with pressure, mistakes, and yes, moments of selfish ambition. Could he have unintentionally crushed Angela's career in his quest to succeed? I didn't know, Michael said quietly, his voice filled with guilt. Angela, I swear to you, if I had known, if I had realized how my actions were affecting you, I would have done something. Angela laughed bitterly. It's too late for that, Michael. The damage is done. The room fell into a heavy silence, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Michael glanced at the boys in the hallway, their expressions a mix of anger and confusion. He turned back to Angela, his resolve hardening. It's not too late, he said firmly. I can't undo the past, but I can try to make things right now. Angela, you're an incredible chef. If you're willing, I'd like to offer you a position at Luciano's Bistro, a senior position with the credit and recognition you deserve. Angela's eyes widened, and for a brief moment, she seemed vulnerable, caught off guard by the offer. But then, her expression hardened again. You think you can just buy my forgiveness with a job? She asked, her voice shaking. No, Michael said, shaking his head. This isn't about buying forgiveness. It's about giving you the opportunity you should have had from the start. I can't erase what I did, Angela, but I want to help you get back to doing what you love. You don't have to forgive me, but please, at least think about it. Angela stared at him, her emotions warring on her face. Finally, she exhaled deeply, her shoulders slumping in a resigned sigh. I don't know, Michael. I don't know if I can trust you. You don't have to decide right now, Michael said gently. Take your time. But whatever you decide, I want you to know, I'm sorry.
Truly?
For the first time, Angela's expression softened, if only slightly. I'll think about it, she said quietly. Michael nodded, a small flare of hope igniting within him as he turned to leave. But before he could step out, Jacob's voice stopped him. Hey, the boy said, his tone less hostile than before. Do you really mean it about helping her? Michael turned back, meeting Jacob's gaze. I do, he said sincerely. Your mom deserves that much and more. Jacob studied him for a moment, then gave a small nod. Okay, we'll see. As Michael stepped out into the rain, he felt a strange mix of emotions, guilt, relief, and a renewed sense of purpose. The road to redemption wouldn't be easy, but he was determined to walk it. The following days were a blur of emotions for Michael, the weight of his past actions continuing to gnaw at him. The encounter with Angela and her boys had shaken him deeply. It wasn't just guilt, it was a sense of responsibility. He had built his success on the foundation of others' hard work, and while he had never intentionally sought to hurt anyone, his blind ambition had clearly left casualties in its wake. Now, he was determined to fix it. Michael sat in his office at Luciano's bistro, staring at the notes he had scribbled after his meeting with Angela. He couldn't change the past, but he could take steps to acknowledge it and create a better future for her sons, and for himself. His first call was to an old industry contact, David. Michael leaned back in his chair. "I need your help. Do you remember Angela Carter's?" David's voice was surprised. "Yeah, of course. She was one of the most promising chefs I've ever seen. What happened to her?" Michael hesitated. I made mistakes, and she paid the price. I need to make it right." David listened quietly as Michael explained the situation. "Well," David said finally, "if you're serious about this, I think the first step is getting her story out there. The industry needs to know what she's capable of." Michael nodded. "That's exactly what I was thinking." "Thanks, David." Hanging up the phone, Michael set a plan in motion. He reached out to food critics, local media, and industry leaders, sharing Angela's contributions to Luciano's bistro and highlighting her skills. At the same time, he worked on creating a new position for her at the restaurant, a co-head chef role with full creative control. A week later, Angela stepped into Luciano's bistro for the first time in years. She was greeted, not with fanfare, but with quiet respect. The staff, many of whom had never met her, had heard her story from Michael. They looked at her with admiration, sensing the significance of her return. Michael met her at the door, his expression earnest. "Thank you for coming," he said. Angela nodded stiffly. "I almost didn't, but Jacob and Ethan, they convinced me to hear you out." Michael smiled. "Your boys are smart. You raised them well." Angela's expression softened slightly. "They're good kids. They want me to be happy, even if I'm not sure I can trust you yet." "I understand," Michael said. "And I don't expect your trust right away, but I hope you'll give me the chance to prove that I'm serious about this." Angela followed him into the kitchen, where he laid out his proposal: the co-head chef role, full creative freedom, and a public acknowledgement of her contributions to Luciano's bistro. He even showed her a draft of a press release he planned to send to local media. Angela read it carefully, her face unreadable. When she finally looked up, her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I never thought I'd hear you say any of this," she admitted. "It's a lot to take in." "I know," Michael said. "Take all the time you need to decide, but no matter what, I want you to know how much I regret the way things turned out." Angela was silent for a long moment, then surprised him by extending her hand. "Let's see if we can make this work." Michael shook her hand, a wave of relief washing over him. "I won't let you down." Angela's return to Luciano's bistro wasn't without its challenges. Rebuilding trust took time, and old wounds didn't heal overnight. But as the weeks passed, the tension between her and Michael began to ease. Together, they created new dishes, blending her bold ideas with his refined techniques. The restaurant thrived, garnering praise for its innovative menu and the collaboration between its two head chefs. One evening, as the restaurant buzzed with activity, Michael stepped into the kitchen to find Angela standing by the stove, a small smile playing on her lips. "What's so funny?" he asked. Angela glanced at him, her smile growing. "I was just thinking about how far we've come. If you told me a month ago that I'd be back here, working with you, I wouldn't have believed it." Michael chuckled. "Honestly, neither would I. But I'm glad you're here. The place feels complete now." Angela nodded, her expression thoughtful. "It's not perfect, but it's a start." As the weeks turned into months, Michael began to see the restaurant in a new light. It wasn't just a business, it was a community, a place where people came together to create something greater than themselves. And Angela's return had reminded him of the importance of recognizing and valuing the contributions of everyone who helped build that community. Jacob and Ethan became regular visitors at the restaurant. Their initial distrust slowly gave way to curiosity and pride. They watched their mother thrive in her element, her confidence returning with every dish she created. One evening, as the boys sat at a table near the kitchen, Michael approached them with a smile. He said, your mom is one of the best chefs I've ever worked with. You should be proud of her. Jacob looked at him, his expression serious.
We are, he said.
Then, after a pause, he added, and I guess we were wrong about you a little. Michael laughed, ruffling Jacob's hair. I'll take it. For the first time in years, Michael felt a sense of peace. He knew he couldn't erase the mistakes of the past, but he also knew that redemption wasn't about perfection. It was about trying, learning, and growing. And as he watched Angela and her sons laughing together in the restaurant that had once been the source of so much pain, Michael realized that the journey was just beginning.